As we look at the life of David, mainly in the book of 2 Samuel chapter 2 today, in some ways you might think 2 Samuel is misnamed. You might recall that 1st and 2nd Samuel were one book in the Hebrew scriptures that was broken into two books when it was translated into the Greek later on under the Septuagint, largely because the size of the scrolls would become just overwhelming. So 2 Samuel really is not about Samuel. Samuel didn't write it. Samuel's not in it. It's really all about David. So we might want to rename it here and call it First David. I don't know. But it's all about David from the beginning and to the end. But in chapter 2, as we come to this one, David is finally made king over Judah. And we find that in the very first verses here. But not over all of Israel. So here we have a divide going on early on. Saul is dead. David has already been anointed by Samuel some years ago, and he is the appointed king. The people know that, but there's a resistance from the people that followed Saul. And so we find that especially in verse 8, David now, like I said, in verse 4, he is the king over Judah. That's just one tribe out of the 12 tribes. And in verse 8, Abner, who was the general, the captain of the army of Saul, he takes one of Saul's remaining sons. And many of his sons were killed in battle earlier. So Ishbosheth is 40 years old, we find out here in verse 10, and he was not killed in battle. So for whatever reason, this man did not go to the battlefield, apparently. And now it seems to be a weak person. Abner controls him, and he makes him king over all of Israel in verse 9. And he was there 40 years old when he became king, and he reigned for about 2 years. On the other hand, David was king over Judah, verse 11, and he reigned for 7 years and 6 months. So now we have a divide between Judah and Israel, and this is a divide that really never fully heals. As we go through the rest of the history of Israel, right up to the time of the Babylonian captivities and the Assyrian captivities, there's a divide. Eventually the nation will divide between Judah and the rest of Israel. And we'll get to that later on. But there's a civil war going on here that should never have happened. When Abner takes Ishbosheth and makes him king, he knew, I'm sure, that David was anointed king, that God wanted him to be king. But Abner did not want that because probably Abner would lose his power, and he wanted to be a power broker. So he does that, and they go to war. So we have a war now between Israel and Judah. Abner's the captain of Israel. Joab, the captain, verse 14, of Judah. And they go to war together. And as they go to war together, one significant thing happens, and that is that one of Joab's brothers, and this, by the way, in verse 18, Joab, Abishai, and Asahel are three cousins of, actually nephews of David. His sister Zeruiah has these three boys, and they're very prominent in David's kingdom. But Asahel decides that he is going to go after Abner, and he's going to kill him in this battle. But verse 23, it didn't turn out that way, and Abner ended up killing him. And as he dies, that sets up a great anger in Joab's life, and eventually he is going to revenge his brother's death. We'll get to that later. But in verse 28, Joab blows the trumpet and calls off the war. The Judah had been winning the battle. They were defeating Israel. As a matter of fact, we find later on that in verse 31 that Abner lost 360 men, but David had only lost 19 in verse 30. So the battle had gone well for Judah. Israel was defeated, and so the battle was called off that day. But a major thing had happened. Civil war had taken place. A civil war that was not necessary. Israel was obviously out of God's will. So that civil war was unnecessary. People are dying. And one of Joab's brothers is now dead by the hand of Abner. The next chapter will show some problems with that. So we'll get to that chapter 3 tomorrow.